a presentation of South Carolina ETV, made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Funds for this program were provided by the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation and the Literature Program of the National Endowment for the Arts.
Prologue, the creation of the world. They were young lovers and married, and hand in hand that first summer in Europe they saw, among other inevitable sights, Michelangelo's creation of the world in the Sistine Chapel. And after an hour stumbled back out into the traffic-clogged streets of Rome, into the blinding midday sun, each with a mild headache and not much to say but smiling and dazed, no longer hand in hand. Then one proposed lunch, for they were famished after a morning of sightseeing, and the other said, as if waking from a dream, "Yes, I suppose that comes next."
Princeton, southern New Jersey. Here, ivy-covered halls house one of the world's great universities. Joyce Carol Oates came to Princeton to teach in 1978. She's lived here ever since. Oates is one of the most respected and prolific writers in America, known for her violent and original vision, as well as her remarkable output. In the past quarter century, she has written more than 36 acclaimed works of fiction and nonfiction. It is not unusual for Oates in a single year to publish a novel, a collection of stories or poetry, and a book of essays.
You write in an essay that writing is not antithetical or an escape from experience, it is experience.
Definitely.
Is that in part a defense against the charge that you're so prolific, too prolific?
Oh, I don't think of it that way. It's like asking an actor if what he's doing is an escape from life, when a great actor in his acting or her acting is life. I mean, this is the experience. The art is a keener experience in the sense of intensity and commitment than just mowing the lawn or baking bread or something like that. I mean, the so-called real life doesn't have the intensity of art. So I don't think one has to defend oneself.
Mm-hmm. And how do you feel about the importance of real-life experiences that you're writing about? You know, the famous advice to young authors is write about what you know. Can a writer who hasn't boxed or played squash, driven a Ferrari Testarossa, really capture accurately the feeling of those things?
Well, we all have experiences. Everyone has experience of heartbreak, and you start losing people you love. Some childhoods give you enough experience to write about virtually forever. Proust is a wonderful example of a great writer who essentially wrote about himself and his own perceptions of a complex society. James Joyce always wrote about his vision of Dublin in a certain era. And these are great geniuses, and yet they focused upon themselves. Hemingway is always writing about himself. And then there are other writers like Dickens who would write of himself sometimes, but then other people a lot of other times. Shakespeare, if he's a quintessential artist and poet, seemed not to be writing about himself at all, except maybe he was always writing about himself in a sort of sleight of hand.
Well, you've written an essay about driving a Ferrari, test driving, and then describing that. Had you not actually test-driven the car, could you have written the same essay?
Well, I wouldn't have written the same essay because there are certain things about the Ferrari Testarossa I wouldn't have known about unless somebody told me. It's such a comfortable car. And when we were riding in it, I noticed how people watched, like on the street, people just stare at that car and they kind of wave and they smile. I must say that has never happened to me in any other car I've been in. And it never would, you know. It's just something about the gloss of the car. It was lipstick red and so forth. It's a $105,000 car. And it's not anything I would ever want to own. You can't park it. You can't park it in a parking lot.
So if you were to have a character driving a Ferrari in one of your novels, would you now be more informed, or you would just be informed in a different way? I mean, if you didn't get a chance to drive that Ferrari, you would in fact read about Ferraris, right, or do some research and then imagine it, right?
I think when you do something personally, it's a little keener. And I can write about squash because, in fact, I played tennis. And so there are certain analogs that you can make. But I've also ridden, we have part owners of a racehorse, a standard-bred filly. And I've ridden in the go-kart around the track. And that's an extraordinary experience. I wrote a story about that. That was in a magazine called Gentleman's Quarterly. And the whole story really is about that experience, which is quite something. It's very dangerous. When you see the drivers in harness racing, they look so in control. But when you're actually in that, and the harness racers go faster than we were going, the mud and the dirt thrown in your face, the horse seems barely in control. The horse is such power. So I wrote about that. I don't think I could have imagined that. I really had to experience that.
One gets a sense reading your fiction, because it is so filled with details, and you write about so many different topics, that you in fact are describing more things that you haven't experienced than ones that you have, or things that you've experienced, you know, in a completely different way.
In a different way, I think that's probably it. But lots of physical experiences of a visceral kind I probably have experienced somehow or other. Except dying, if I've written about that. People have always written about dying, and yet they obviously haven't died, you know, they're coming close to dying perhaps.
Joyce Carol Oates was born in 1938 in Lockport, a small New York town on the shoulder of the Erie Canal.
Did you read, you must remember this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is that footbridge.
Did you actually look at the canal and the bridge and things when you were writing the book, or that was just an afterthought after it was written?
Well, it was so much a part of my life when I was 12, 13 years old, so I can remember it. But that's the center of the novel, in the sense that's the first image that I have. Feeling sorry for myself, frowning author photo. I guess these are all taken around the same time. Clowning. And this is my first desk. I guess my father probably took that. It looks like I'm playing with a little glass animal or something, I don't remember. That's a one-room school. And the door was right about here, and an old wood-burning stove would have been here. I don't think the quality of instruction was too wonderful.
Oates attended Syracuse University on a scholarship, then went on to get her master's degree in English at the University of Wisconsin. When her first book was published in 1963, she was recognized as a major new talent. In 1970, she won a National Book Award for her novel, Them. And almost every year, one of her stories is included in the O. Henry Prize Collection or in the Best American Short Story Anthology.
You notice Mike is not very tall. They say he's 5'11", but I'm 5'9", so you can see he's not very tall. And he doesn't look physically prepossessing the way Muhammad Ali does, or Larry Holmes.
In the 1980s, Oates reached a new audience of boxing fans with her profile of Mike Tyson in Life magazine and her acclaimed nonfiction book, On Boxing.
In your nonfiction book on boxing, you write that boxing is a celebration of the lost religion of masculinity. How did you become attracted to boxing?
It's really a complex answer, because my father took me to boxing matches when I was a little girl, and he was very good friends with a boxer who had been good as an amateur, then he turned professional and had some bad luck. So boxing was part of my background. Then when I did research for a novel called You Must Remember This, my interest in boxing was reawakened because of the setting was 1946, 1956. In that era, boxing was very prominent in American life. So it's really a conflation of a number of reasons that I got interested in again. Then once I was doing research, and the editor asked me to write an essay for the New York Times Magazine. And I said, well, you wouldn't be interested in what I'm doing research in, it's boxing. He said, oh yes, we would be. I guess he felt that a woman writing about boxing would be so extraordinary, you know. He probably didn't expect to be any good, but that a woman was writing about it was the catch. So I wrote that, and then someone asked me to do a book. And I worked with a photographer named John Raynard. When you're doing journalism, it often is wayward, that you start with one thing and then somebody invites you to do a little more, and then somebody wants you to do a book. So it's not always that you choose what you're going to do, but it blossoms and grows almost on its own.
And you know, you describe yourself as a feminist. I mean, were you aware of, in writing this book, which is a wonderful book, sort of out-machoing the macho male boxing writers, the Hemingways and Mailers?
Well, I wasn't thinking so much of that. I like Norman Mailer's writing about boxing quite a bit. I think he's very good. Hemingway didn't write that much about boxing, and he has a boxer in The Sun Also Rises, Jake Cohen, and it's not very good. And then the boxing scene in the novel is over with in about 2 sentences. Not very good. You'd think if you were going to write about boxing, you might have really gone into it, done more with it. Mailer writes much better about boxing. Then I have long sequences, and you must remember this about boxing, that I was very, very emotionally drawn into, and just, it was hard to write. It's very hard to write action anyway. Any sort of action scenes in novels are very hard to write.
Yeah, you talk about the draining activity writing is for you.
Especially scenes like that. When you're moving through time and space with people and they have consciousness, there's some strange rhythm that you have to get so that it moves right. If you have a person sitting at twilight looking out the window and thinking, that's not hard to write because it's a static scene. It might get too long, you can cut it. But when people are moving along through time and space and having their thoughts and doing things physically, at least for me, that's the hardest kind of writing.
But is it a challenge? I mean,
oh, it's a terrific challenge. I just write the scenes over and over and over again until I get these different strands to my way of thinking till I get them right. But the boxing scenes I do over and over again. Sometimes it's too slow, sometimes it's too fast. And when you see a boxing match, it's a curious experience in time because a 3-minute match can be very long. If you had to fight Mike Tyson for 10 seconds, it would be the longest 10 seconds of your life. Maybe 5 seconds, you know, really go very slowly. And so with boxing is so intense, and then they have the 1-minute rest between the rounds, and people kind of trying to relax or get in a different time, and then you go back in the intensity again. Maybe writing is a bit like that.
Yeah, in your essays and writing on boxing, you sort of suggest that writing is sometimes like boxing. Can you find metaphors for writing in almost everything?
Well, I don't know. I suppose you could. Boxing has nothing to do with writing, and boxers have no interest in writers, I don't think. It's all just the other way around, because writers are maybe looking for metaphors. And they see something about the pitilessness of the opponent and being in this elevated ring under lights, and you're kind of exposed to all these strangers' eyes, you know. And it's very brutal metaphor, but it has its romantic aura also. And I know that many of my male friends who are writers are very interested in boxing, very much. It's almost a rarity to find a male writer who isn't interested in boxing.
Why are you so intrigued by Mike Tyson?
Well, Tyson was ascending at the same time I was writing, and because Life magazine asked me to write about Tyson, and he was the only boxer that I really met, which is like saying you only met one composer and you met Mozart, or you only know one actor and it was Marlon Brando. It was just really good luck.
Where did you two meet?
We met at the University of Wisconsin in graduate school. Joyce was going for her MA and I was finishing up my PhD.
He was a very distinguished older man getting a PhD.
And did you fall madly in love and then get married right
That's
away?
embarrassing. It was so long ago, we scarcely remember, actually.
Well,
No, we got married in 3 months.
yeah, we were engaged within a month.
Joyce Carol Oates has been married to Ray Smith, a former English professor, since 1960. In 1974, they founded the Ontario Review, a semi-annual magazine focusing on new writing. 5 years later, they began publishing books, including poetry, fiction, memoirs, essays, the work of first novelists and Nobel Prize winners.
One of my favorites is an anthology of contemporary American poets called The Generation of 2000. Achieved recognition as
Like the other facets of Joyce Carol Oates' professional life, teaching and writing, her work with the Ontario Review Press grows out of her consuming interest in literature.
Is your common interest in literature really what has bonded you two together for all these years? I mean, your marriage is successful by anybody's measure just by its length. In today's America.
Today's America,
especially, yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, that is certainly one of the things. The trouble with a lot of marriages is that the husbands and wives don't have enough to talk about, but
We
we
have
do.
plenty to
If
talk
we run
about.
out of things to talk about, we can always have an editorial conference.
You've written about the difficulty in criticizing oneself as an artist.
Yes.
The self-critic is difficult. At the same time, you're known for responding to reviews of your books that you think are unfair, writing to the publishers or editors of where they've been published.
If it's factually unfair, like if something's misrepresented, then I think I should probably step forward. If something's factually wrong, and many reviews are very irresponsible, like they just get the plot wrong. But if it's just somebody's opinion about whether something's slow or fast, or they don't like it, or they do like it, then that's their opinion.
So why bother correcting a critic? I mean, they're only critics after all. You're the artist.
Well, why not? It's like counterpunching. If you acquiesce to something that's wrong, I mean, why shouldn't you? If you, Tom Vitale, were misrepresented in the New York Times, and it was said that you weigh 260 pounds and you have blonde hair, if you don't respond, it just seems this goes down as a public record. You know, it doesn't cost anything to write in. It's like a little bit of counterpunching, I suppose, or set the matter right.
Joyce Carol Oates lives with her husband in an affluent neighborhood 5 miles outside the town of Princeton. Her novel, American Appetites, is set in a similar community of successful academics and intellectuals.
There are 2 or 3 men who think they are the model for the protagonist. One jokes about suing me, but I don't think he's going to really do that, because there really isn't any model. I mean, I myself am as much of a model for the main character, and it's set in our house. The novel's set in this house, which has a lot of glass in it. What is in the novel are the meals, certain recipes, and dishes, and table settings, and houses, and things like that. But there are no actual people, because I don't write that way. I do composites or completely fictitious people. I would put in the novel attitudes and experiences, like when the police come to the house at night and they bang on the door. That happened to us. I sort of put things together. I think most novelists are like magpies or crows, taking bits of details and ingredients from real life and weaving them all together into a kind of fanciful nest. And people look in the nest and say, well, here's an old ribbon. That was my ribbon. Or here's an old pipe cleaner or something. But really, it's a complete gestalt, and in a sense doesn't bear any relationship to those same things outside the context.
You've written in an essay called Beginnings that before you start writing, you have to be really preoccupied with something to the point of obsession or distraction.
Yes.
What was your preoccupation before you began American Appetites?
Well, I was thinking about getting older, and I was thinking about how when you've achieved a certain plateau, not of power so much, because most academic intellectuals don't have power in a political sense, but just of your ambitions being partly realized, then you still have the same zest for life, and it's like an aging boxer, still has the same desire and adrenaline, but he doesn't fight as much anymore. He may in fact be retired. It's not exactly like that with intellectuals, but it's just a feeling that you have the same energies and appetites maybe as when you were 16 or 18, but you are looked upon as a successful person in the eyes of the world. So there's such a disparity between what you feel inside and what other people think when they look at you. Like when I teach at Princeton, I have students between the ages of 18 and 21. Now, I don't tell them this, they wouldn't understand, but I identify more with them than I do with my own self. I know that sounds metaphysically impossible, but I identify with young people who are not struggling so much as making their way, you know, they're kind of rising and questing, and I identify with that time in life, early, late adolescence.
There are a lot of comments in American Appetites about time. There's time is like a relentless wave. The different characters think about time. At the very end of the novel, there's a suggestion that maybe Einstein's theory of reversibility of time works. I mean, were you trying to say something particular about time, the nature of time?
Well, the people in the novel are middle-aged. And when you are middle-aged, you look upon life maybe with a slightly different attitude. The generations are following after you, and your own parents may not be living any longer. So time seems suddenly different. You're like at a plateau. You're not so much going up the way you were, but you're on the plateau. You are where you were going. You are now where you were going, where you were headed. So you would like time to stop. But it's at that point, as you get older, that it accelerates. So for older people, like say in their 70s or 80s, time goes very fast. Their sense of time is very different from that of an infant's or a child's. I think we all remember when we were children how long summer would be. You have summer off from school. It would seem endless, like the Sahara Desert. Now it goes very swiftly. I mean, it does for some people. So that's why they're so concerned with time in the novel, because they're mainly middle-aged. Affairs, Glynis, throughout their marriage. Seeing Ian's look of utter disbelief, Glynis said, "Of course, you would never have guessed." She smiled at him angrily. "You, wrapped in your own little world, would never have guessed." Ian thought, "I must get out of here. I can't breathe." Glynis said, "Wouldn't you even like to know who they were, the men? Aren't you at least curious?" Ian shook his head mutely. He really could not believe what he'd heard, stared at Glynis as if in appeal. "One of them I really did love. I love him, as a matter of fact, even now," Glynis said, her voice breaking. "Gave him up for you, hurt his feelings, hurt myself, for you." "Glynis, you're saying things you... And all for what? For you. For God's sake," Ian said. For you, and now you're too cowardly even to ask his name." Again, Ian shook his head. His heart was knocking against his ribs. He said, Who was it? Is it? Glynis said. Who is it? Now that she'd roused him to anger, Glynis smiled at him bitterly and shrugged. "What difference does it make? It's over now." "Who is it? Someone I know?" "Too late, all over, because of you." "Someone in Hazleton?" "Yes, it's someone in Hazleton," Glynis said indifferently, pouring herself another glass of wine. Her hands were very unsteady now. "A prominent man, a much talked-of man in Hazleton, a friend of yours, in fact. And I gave him up, and that was a mistake. Christ, was that ever a mistake? And now you, lying to me about her, you hypocrite, thinking you could deceive me." "Glynis, you must listen to me." "As if I can believe anything you say." Then, with no warning, Glynis was on her feet, sobbing uncontrollably, screaming at Ian to get out of the house. Ian leapt up and tried to restrain her, for she'd become in that instant hysterical. She shoved him away, screaming, as if fearful he meant to hurt her. Though he had not seen her snatch it up, she was holding the steak knife in her right hand, brandishing it, in fact, in an extravagant gesture that at another time would have reduced them both to tears of laughter. Ian reached blindly for the knife, closing his fingers around the blade, and Glynis, screaming, struck him on the head and on the nose, bloodying his nose. And in their desperate struggle, the table was overturned and everything went flying and crashed to the floor. China, food, candles, bottles. Ian had no awareness of his fingers bleeding, but he knew his nose was bleeding, and still Glynis continued in her fury, striking wild blows against his head, his chest, taunting him with that terrible word, you, you, as if it were the foulest of obscenities. He seized her shoulders and began to shake her, pleading with her to stop this madness, stop. And still she struggled, demonically strong, and would not stop screaming, her eyes wild and her forehead gleaming with sweat, and her hair charged as if with static electricity. Jan thought of Medusa, that monstrous being at whom the hero Perseus could not look directly, out of terror of being turned to stone. Jan thought, she wants my heart, nothing less will appease her. He ducked to avoid her crazed, flailing blows and shoved her from him with all his strength. And Glynis stumbled and tripped and fell with great force backward against one of the plate glass windows, and through it, the wall of glass shattering instantly amid her terrified screams. Shards and splinters flew into Ian's face like stinging insects. The noise of the breaking glass was deafening, yet it died away at once, and as Glynis' screaming, so terrible in his ears, died away at once, almost at once. She was lying on the flagstone terrace beneath the window, one of her legs still caught in the window. Jan stepped through to help her and almost fell on top of her, his ankle suddenly livid with pain. He'd cut it on a jagged fragment of glass still in the window frame. He called her name repeatedly, crouched over her, trying in nightmare panic to lift her. There was, suddenly, glass everywhere, in Glynis' hair and in Jan's, in their clothing, on the flagstones. A net of blood began to spread over Glynis' face. She did not seem to have lost consciousness, yet was incoherent, insensible, writhing and moaning, her eyelids fluttering, her body a dead weight in his arms. Jan knew he must run to the telephone to call an ambulance, to get help for her, but for some seconds, for what seemed a very long time, he squatted there, paralyzed, simply unable to move, unable to lay Glynis back down on the terrace, amid the shattered glass and the blood, and leave her.
This is PBS.